Hi guys, I'm going to work with you today about basic wheel throwing steps. So whether you're in Ceramics 1 or Ceramics 2, this tutorial will work for both of you guys. So when you are starting wheel throwing, obviously you need to understand the parts of the wheel. You've got your wheel head, right? You've got this yellow part here that's going to collect the water. We call that a basin. Over on the side here will be our power switch. Some of the wheels do go in reverse, but for the most part, your wheel should spin counterclockwise. To get started, I would recommend 1.5 pounds of clay. Make sure it's wedged, make sure it's soft. Make sure it's also homogeneous, meaning you don't have little hard chunks in there mixed in with the soft chunks because it'll be really hard to throw. You will need a bucket of water. Okay, so warm, cold, doesn't matter to me. You don't have to fill the bucket all the way. I've got it about halfway. You will need a bat. Dirty, clean, it doesn't matter. I prefer to find the textured side of the bat. There are little pins in the wheel head here that affix both the square and the 12-inch round bats to the wheel head. In addition, I usually grab a variety of tools just to kind of get me started. A wheel sponge, so you might have the half moon sponges, you might have a whole one. I like my little flat one there. I like to get some wooden tools, so whether I get a wooden knife or a wooden rib, I get a needle tool. And the one thing I forgot, which was my wire tool. Okay, so that's how we'll remove it from the bat at the bitter end. All right, so, also aprons. Make sure you wear an apron. I like to drape a towel over my legs just so I don't get clay all over my pants. But then we're ready to get started. So the first step to wheel throwing is centering. And this is where you are forcing the clay to the middle of the wheel so that you have this nice even mound. So I'm going to actually take a minute here. Let's turn it on. And kind of clean my wheel head up. So if there's a little dirt on there, you can clean it up pretty quickly. My knife there. Some people swear by having a little bit of moisture on the bat. A tiny bit is fine. I don't like to have too much, especially if my bat is really smooth, because I feel like the clay kind of slides around on me. All right. So nice, even ball cylinder kind of shape. So it has to be kind of round. You don't want it really lumpy and uneven. Slam it down in the middle. All right. Then I usually do a quick check. Is it actually in the middle of my wheel? So I'll spin it, and then you can see like it's predominantly in the middle. If I slam it down, and I'll do this wrong, and then it's going like, ooh, don't try to center that, all right? Try to get it in the middle of the wheel. So a lot of times you can just slide it and form it center. So the more even you make it before you actually start centering the actual act of, the easier the process will be. All right, so now it's in the middle of my wheel. Water is a crucial element to the wheel throwing process. So you'll see how whenever I'm throwing, my hands are generally very wet, or I'll be holding my sponge so that I can add water to the surface. Water is important mainly because it's going to reduce the friction. If my hands are really dry and I drag it on the clay is going to stick to my hands, and then the clay is going to come off, or it's going to come off in huge chunks. So water is purely there just to reduce the friction. So you don't want to drown it, but you want just enough that the clay isn't sticking to your hands. You should just have like a little bit of slip on your hands. All right, so for centering, what I want to do, and I'm going to actually move this camera back just a hair so you can kind of see my body just a little bit, playing around with this. I want to take my left elbow. I don't know if that's even better. I'm going to take my left elbow, and I'm either going to root it into my hip bone or into my side. My left arm, same thing, root it into that hip bone, because I don't want these loose arms kind of floating all over the place. I want a nice, strong body to help center this piece. The parts of my hands that I'm going to use, so I'm going to teach you two ways. The first way I center is I use the heel of my left hand, and that's going to push in. And if you think about the parts of a clock where you have 12, 3, 6, and 9, I'm over here about 7 o'clock. And then I'm going to hold the sponge in my right hand, and it's going to push on the face of the clock. Now, I'm not way out here, okay? I have this pinky knuckle that's about dead center, okay? So I'm with a great amount of force with my elbows tucked in and my roll my shoulders down. I'm going to put my wrists together, and I'm going to push in with my left hand and down with my right hand at the same time, right? If you do one or the other, more, you're going to end up with a big fat disc, or you're going to push it right off. Okay. So elbows in, wrists together, roll my shoulders down my back, push in with my left, and then I'm going to push down with my right. All right. And then I'm going to float away nice and slow. Okay. So that's one way to center. All right. That is one way to center. Mistakes that people make. They either push in too hard and not enough on top, and they keep getting it taller, or they whip their hands back and it's kind of doing this hula hooping. That's not centered. So you got to find that balance between your top hand and your bottom hand. And then the slow exit is really key. The other things I see people do is they dig their fingers in and they get all these like grooved lines. So you want to avoid that. Or they flatten too much, or they make what I call a punch bowl. They kind of angle this wrist and they go like this, which, I mean, if you're starting to dive, isn't the worst thing, but we're not ready to dive yet. We're just trying to center the clay. So it's an inward and downward. Now, some people might teach the coning method, which isn't the worst thing. I think that this helps you get more control of the clay. If you want to, usually with larger amounts, we do practice coning. And that's where you're taking kind of the outer edges of your hands. You have to set the sponge down. That's usually why I don't let you guys do that. But you're lifting up the clay and kind of forming a tall mound. So lifting it up. But then you're honestly going right back to the pose we were just in, where we're pushing the clay down. So I'm gonna pull this hand away so you can really see my left. So you can see that what's touching the clay. So it's really that left wrist, all right? And then this is just kind of pressing down on top to make that nice even bound. Now the clicking is my bad because it doesn't quite fit. So if I pull my hands away too fast, you can see the bat's really shifty. So that's where I just want to get the shape I think I know I need. And then just make sure I exit very slowly. So you know you're centered when your body stops moving. All right. The clay should also look like it's not moving when it is. So I'm spinning now at fast speed. I don't think I mentioned that before. So when I center, I do want it at a fast speed. But I know it's centered when it's not, like my body's not moving, the piece isn't all over the mat. Okay. It's in the middle of the wheel. Okay. So whether you do kind of the push in and down method, or you do the coning method where you lift it up and push down, doesn't matter. All right. My next step is to dive. All right. So that is to make an opening. So as we work with the clay, you'll notice it's very similar to the pinch method. We're starting with a ball of clay. We're pushing our thumbs into it. We're stretching the clay. We're lifting it up. Okay. But now it's just spinning and wet. All right. So for diving, it doesn't matter to me how you dive. You can dive with your fingers. You can dive with your fingers. You can dive with your thumbs. You can dive with fingers and thumb, or the other way around. All that matters is that you're in the middle of the wheel. All right. I don't want you diving like over here, right? I want you to find dead center where you kind of get sucked into the vortex. That's where you want to dive. What also helps is if the top is kind of flat, I think that helps you kind of find the center point as well. Okay. All right. So you can rest your hands on the clay. I don't go warp speed. I do pull the speed back just a little bit. So sometimes when I center, I'll call it highway speed. When I pull it back, I'll be like country road speed, spring mill, 132 kind of feeling there. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack my thumbs and I'm going to push with a great amount of force into the center of the piece. So I'll pull my hands away so you can kind of see where I've started. So you might start with your thumbs. That's okay. Now my thumbs kind of bend backwards, so a little crazy. You just don't want to dive with the tips of your fingers. So you're not diving with the very tip. I like to dive with the pad. So that means if you have to kind of angle your thumb a little bit, that's fine. I'll kind of change my position so you can kind of see the angle at which I'm going here. So I'm going to push down. Until I think I'm about 1/4 of an inch to a half an inch from the bottom. All right. And if you're not sure, what we'll do is we'll stop and measure. Now, what I want you to notice is the first time I've stopped my wheel, I don't want to touch it a whole bunch, because every time you touch it and it has stopped, you've moved it off center. And one of the key things about wheel throwing is keeping everything concentric. So that means concenter, same center, all these circles kind of coming together. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my needle tool. I'm going to poke it through the bottom, all the way to the back. Okay. Then I'm going to take my hand. I'm going to put my finger where the clay is, and I'm going to pull it out together. And that will tell me how deep my base is. I usually say, go aim for like the thickness of your finger. All right. So that's usually anywhere between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch, depending on your fingers. And that lets you know you have a good base. Anything thinner, call me over. I'll help you try to push clay back. If it's any thicker, just keep diving. All right. Now I do have a hole in the bottom of my piece, but if I spin it and push my sponge down on it, it'll close right back up. Okay. All right. So I did the diving part. The next step is crucial to make pulling easier. So for the wheel speed here, it's still kind of that medium fast speed. So kind of, just above neighborhood speed, I say. But as you look at the inside of this, you can see it kind of slopes down to a point. I could go to pulling, but I think if you open the floor of the piece, it makes it a lot easier to pull. So what I want to do here, I don't really want to change the outside of my pot. It might change, but that's okay. What I'm really focused on is changing the interior shape. So it's not a U, but it's more of kind of a boxy square. So with just a little bit of water on the inside, I'm going to offer resistance. Now I'm going to do this with my right hand on the outside. You can do this with your left hand. And actually, I'll see what works best with the camera here. But working right in front of me. So I try not to do this where I have to reach across the wheel. Working right in front of me, my right wrist is just going to act as resistance. So I have something to kind of push into. My left hand is going to slide inside the pot. You're going to notice how my hands always stay connected. So whether I center, whether I dive, or whether I open or pull, my hands are always touching one another. So I'm going to put my right wrist on the outside. I'm going to try to move my hand here so you can at least see it, move my thumb out of the way. And I'm trying to make a brick wall here. I'm going to take these fingers, and I'm not going to push into the cup of my hand. I'm going to push into my wrist here. And I'm going to curl these fingers under like this. All right. And I'm going to push into my wrist like that. Okay. So that now, as I look into the piece, I have a flat floor and straight wall. So I'll switch hands so you can maybe see a different angle of that. So same premise. I'm going to put my left wrist. I'm not going to push into the cup. I'm going to push into my wrist because this bone right here is what I want to try to push into. Now the clay's a little dry, so I'm going to give it a little more moisture. This clay's really thirsty. And then this clay hand started here, and I'm just going to curl these fingers under and make the floor nice and flat. So I start in the middle, and I use my 2 middle fingers because they're, as you can see, longer. I'm just going to curl those fingers under and push it into my wrist. And the ultimate goal is that the outside stays a bit nice and straight, but then I get the flat floor and then the inside wall that kind of goes straight down. If you find it kind of bows out on the side, you're probably pushing more into the cup of your hand and not into the bony wrist part. All right. So now I've opened. I have a flat floor. I have a distinct kind of corner where the inside wall meets the floor, and then the outside predominantly goes up. My next step is pulling. So this is where we're actually going to gain height on the clay. It's the trickiest. All right. So for this, we do want to make sure everything's just got a nice moisture level. I don't want to drown it because you adding more water to it just makes the clay really sloppy. But I do want to slow the wheel down. So I'm going to slow it down just to a nice, easy pace. You know, I say slow, but it's kind of more, you are truly in a neighborhood, kind of watching for kids kind of thing. All right. So at this speed, we're going to keep our hands together. All right. Once again, I'm going to use my longest fingers, which are my 2 middle fingers. It might be different for your hands. There are different ways to pull. Some people use a knuckle. Some people use a sponge. Some people use a rib. I'll try to show you all 3. All right. But the goal here is that you are using not the tips of your fingers necessarily, but the pads of your fingers to kind of pinch the wall of the clay and then relocate that clay up. It's a very gradual process. It's very soft. You shouldn't feel like you're working against the clay. The other thing that you should need to pay attention to is you always pull on the right side. So you want that clay going away from your fingertips. If you come over here on the left and try to pull, the tendency is we stick our finger through the wall. So we want to pull on the right side with that clay going away. If it's really awkward, we can reverse the wheel, but I'd rather you practice on the right. Plus, most of you are right-handed, and it's actually from the outside that we lift the clay. It's not the inside. If it gets really wide, it's your inside hand's working too hard. Okay, we'll do that later. All right, so I'm gonna use my middle 2 fingers on the inside, my middle 2 fingers on the outside. I'm gonna connect my hands. So whether it's just a fingernail or something, but that's not, you're not doing this. Okay, you have to have your hands connected, your elbows are down. I always say kind of look down on the piece as well as you pull so that you kind of lift it up, because you kind of instinctively lift it towards your face. If you're kind of leaning back, the tendency is that you pull towards your face and it kind of goes out. So I kind of shaved off a little clay there just so you can see where I'm going to start, because I'm going to start at the bat. All right. So I'm going to first dig in with that outside hand, and then it's got to meet this other finger. All right. So I'm not like offset here. I'm not like one hand back here, one hand here. They have to kind of act like they're pinching together. I'm going to dig in, and my hands are just slightly offset. And I'm going to keep that pinch, and hopefully you're seeing that little ripple as I lift up through the wall. Now my clay got really dry. I got talking too much. This stoneware is thirsty. All right. So we're going to do that again. So I'm going to dig in. My hands are connected. This hand on the inside is kind of down in that corner. I'm going to dig in. Look straight down on the piece. Slow and steady wins the race on this one. When I get to the rim, I don't freak out and whip my hands away. I just let it slowly come up through the rim. Okay, shape it off there. Other things that you can practice if you feel like your walls are getting really uneven in height is a compression. And that's where you're going to take the sponge and you're going to very gently push down on the rim. So that'll help prevent any air bubbles, or even it kind of helps, it gives you an opportunity to even the wall height out as well. Okay. All right. So I did promise I would show you different ways to pull. So left hand still inside, right hand outside. So I'm going to make like this little hook with my right forefinger. But the process is still the same. I'm going to dig in to create a pinch. And the trick to pulling is to have it come from the outside so that you get height. The wheel kind of just wants to throw it out because of the centrifugal force. So it's you kind of pressing from the outside that you do truly get nice height. All right. I'll do it one more time with a sponge. I don't know if I really need to pull this anymore, but I'll at least show you guys. Oh, I'm getting really tall here. I got to move this guy back a little bit. Maybe a little forward. There we go. There we go. I'm getting nice and tall. All right. I'm going to do one more, but this time I'm going to push through a sponge. So it's the same premise. My hands are connected. Left hand inside, right hand outside. If this clay, especially since it is such a thirsty clay, sometimes pulling with the sponge is nice. Now you can see I'm kind of it's getting wobbly on me. I keep hitting dry spots. So here's a good trick. If you need to get water on the outside, since it's caving out, run your hand, let the water run down your hand. You can see how it kind of coats that whole side. So you can always stop a pull and then pick right up where you left off. Now you notice I keep going slower and slower with my wheel, but I never stop it. Oh, hitting dry spots on the inside now. So I know I'm hitting a dry spot because I can feel it tug. I can feel it tug on me. Okay, so my walls aren't going straight up. I can always remedy that later. You can always kind of compress it in too. You can see how it gets really kind of cranky and it might start to twist on me a little bit. I got real thin in the middle. I was trying to show you all the pulls. So here I'm just trying to even the wall out. Okay, so once I've pulled the piece all the way down, I'm looking for wall consistency. So I'm looking at the base and I'm making sure it doesn't go from like really skinny to really fat at the bottom. So a lot of times it's just a matter of looking down the wall. Sometimes I do have calipers if you want to measure, but sometimes just putting your hands down on the bottom of the piece and just feeling the wall kind of helps you judge, okay, is it really thick? Is it really thin? Because you can never tell just by the rim, all right? If you do end up with a really uneven rim and you want to Let's say you got one wall taller. That's usually because you got off center some points, so you have more clay on one side. If you do need to trim the rim, you can take your needle tool. I'm just going to gently hold the rim. I'm not necessarily pinching, I'm just holding it so it's steady. I'm going to rest my needle tool right on my thumb, and then I'm just going to slowly insert it into the wall until I cut the ring off. So when I stuck it into the wall, my finger kind of got it, and then I knew to lift that ring up. So that's a good way to kind of even it, or if your wall, that top wall is uneven or it's just really thin. And then I just come in with my sponge, and I just know that if I stay very still, the clay will always fix itself. It's when I'm erratic and moving all over the place, like it won't fix itself. All right, so I have a decent looking cup here. I think I've got the height that I need. At this stage, you can be done. So after pulling, you can be done. So if you're doing the wheel halves for ceramics too, you can stop right here. But if you want to get into some shaping, whether your mug, bowl, whatever we're doing there, jar, just know there's 3 ways to shape. So the first one is called collaring. Very wet clay, very wet hands, very slow wheel speed. So this is like school zone. Kids are playing right by the street. You want to go very slow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little water on the rim here. Run it down my fingers. So by collaring, we're just kind of bringing sections in. So this might be at the collar, okay, or it might be down by the foot, or even just kind of in the middle. But you're just very gently squeezing areas in. Okay. And then as long as you exit slowly, the clay will kind of re-round itself. If you jerk your hands back, it'll stay kind of odd shaped. So that's collaring. Bellying is where I kind of cut my hand on the outside. And I take my wet sponge on the inside, or your hand, depending on your clay body. And I'm just very slowly kind of stretching it to the shape of my hand. Now, depending on how thick or thin your walls are, you might not be able to stretch it very far. So my walls are really thin, so I don't want to stretch it too much. The last thing there, and it kind of already naturally did it when I collared it in, is to flare. So if you're making like a big soup, big bowl and you want to open it up, basically just remembering however you hold your hands, the clay will form to your hands. So if you just hold your hands really still, and if the clay is really wet, it'll do whatever you tell it to do. All right. It is an inanimate object. It will listen to you. Okay. So you are done shaping when you like it. All right. So if you don't want to shape it, that's fine. There are limits to how far you can stretch your clay. Like right there, it just started to fold on me, so it didn't want to be stretched anymore. So you are kind of at the mercy of how thick your clay is, and how wet it is. Sometimes it'll collapse just because it's too wet. So I'm gonna cut this guy because it's kind of acting funky right about here. And that's usually everybody's soul crushing moment, like, oh, you cut it. And I was like, well, it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. Mm-hmm. So at this point, maybe I could be a jar. Maybe I open this up and make it a bowl. We'll see. So just understanding that shaping is slow. You need to kind of be very gradual with the clay. Now, if you really stretch it out, you will not be able to stretch it back in. There is kind of it'll start to fold on you. Okay. So once it's the shape you like, all right, you know exactly what you've done. I take the time to kind of clean my piece up. All right. So once you like the shape, or it's to the height that you need, depending on the assignment, I'm going to soak all the water out of the inside. Okay. I don't want to leave any water. If you leave water, what will happen is the rim will dry before the base, and you'll see what we call an S crack down in the bottom of your clay. All right. I usually try to soak as much off. You don't have to clean that. I clean that. I try to soak as much off the outside surface as I can. You can, if you want, use your wooden rib and really smooth it, or you can just wait until we use the Giffen grip to smooth it then. But you just want to get any standing water out of the piece. So you have those teardrop ribs or the L ribs there that you can use there. But once it's the shape you like, all right, and you have your nice even walls, you have a nice even base. I do usually, if I haven't already kind of incorporated it, I will try to shave off a tiny bit down at the bottom. It's going to help it release later. And also, if I just have a ton of clay down there, it'll be less I have to do on the Giffen grip later. So kind of shave all that chunky stuff off. Okay. And you can even use your rib if you want really straight walls and things like that. Okay. Then some people like to spin their project while they wire tool it. I'm not a huge fan of that because sometimes you guys just go too fast. I'm gonna kind of soften this room a little bit. Put my sponge over. I don't like that, so I just pull it through. If you have a really big piece, sometimes we do need to spin it, but very taut. So I've got my thumbs, I've got it wrapped around my hand once. I always say it should kind of hurt a little if you're pulling it nice and tight. Push down on the wheel head and pull it through. And if your base is thick enough, you should not see the wire. All right. Then do not touch your pot. Okay. Just pick the bat up. It's already on a bat. All right. Then we can manipulate it. We can, when it's leather hard, we can carve it. We can stamp it. We can do all sorts. And this can always be like the start of something. So, not my best work, but it's there. Whenever you're learning, I cannot stress enough to slice this in half. You will learn more slicing it in half than me doing 100 demos. Because by slicing it in half, you're going to see it. You're going to see your wall thickness. You're going to see your base. Now, my walls might flop because I made a bowl. But let's take a look at this. All right. So I've got a nice thick base. So I've got plenty of room to do a really dramatic foot. My walls, they got really skinny. But they are fairly consistent and they're thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. So I can definitely take care of that when I go to trim. But I want to look for that consistency. But like I said, I kept showing you how to pull, so my walls get really, really thin. Ideal thickness is about 1/4 of an inch. You can throw as thick as in half, but you just want evenness as you pull on up. And then the beauty is if you do this at any stage, whether you center dive, open, or pull, we can take that clay after we talk about it, and then we can kind of wad it up and try again. Now, I wouldn't just put this back on the wheel and start throwing. It'll be full of air bubbles. That will not work. So you do want to take it over the table, wedge it really well, and then clean the bat and then start again. So don't start with really messy stuff because you'll regret it later. Okay. To store it, if I was going to keep it, I would not put it in a bag. I would cover it with a bucket. So that way it would dry slower and I would be able to trim it later. If it's your very first piece and you just want it to go bone dry, just so we can kind of hand trim it with the metal rib and the green scrubby, that's fine. But if you want to use the Giffen, you do need to let it go leather hard slowly. All right. Those are the basics of wheel throwing. So I look to see you guys in the wheel center.